It was a great day.
Katie, you have the perfect background.
It's off of the 2019 calendar.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Happy holidays. Would like to call to order the work session for the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, December 14, 2020. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Boland.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Boat. Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Councilmember Nyan.
Here.
Councilmember Tony.
Here.
Councilmember Bros.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Remy. Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Here.
Okay, excellent. Again, welcome. Before we get to action items, we have 12 informational items. Does any member of the council wish to discuss or have any questions about any of the items under information? Councilmember McCutcheon.
I don't really have a question, but I just want to thank everybody who was involved in the construction of the Ward 5 Park. Thank you very much. The kids are enjoying it. They couldn't wait for us to cut the ribbon for them to enter the playground. A special shout out to Mayor Boland, who breaking the tie made that possible. And the residents greatly appreciate that. Thank you to Mr. Vunich and Mr. King Keitel, who worked extremely hard on the design and getting the park constructed and implemented. So thank you. The kids are loving it.
Thank you. Councilmember Garitano.
Okay. Yeah, my comments are related to the update on the holiday decorations, and want to first say thank you for the work that you guys did with that and those involved. I do have one item to bring it to your attention. A resident let me know that the lights at the water fountain are not working. They're off. So when I was passing by City Hall tonight, I don't know if it was yet time for them to go on, but we'll probably want to check that out because that looks really nice when it's lit up. And then the other question is that usually we would decorate the street lights with wreaths and ribbons, and I noticed that didn't happen this year, so was just wondering what happened with that.
Steve Cross, are you aware of the answer to that, or Joe? Joe Vinich, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Gailey Contracting did the roundabout at Taylor Road and Manchester Road. He typically does the light poles with the garland and bows. When he went over to the corral to get the materials out of storage, they were pretty beat up. And I don't know if that was because of the winter before or what. But when we started talking about the cost of installing them and now purchasing them, we decided that maybe this year we'd hold off and see how things are next year.
Okay, thanks for that update.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay. Anyone else have anything under information that you would like to discuss or about which you have a question before we go to action items? Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, just quick note, Rick, on the West Glen Farms, Truman Road turn, how far down Truman Road to the east of that intersection is Wildwood, and where does Ellisville start?
Councilmember Bertolino, the Truman Road is actually within the maintenance responsibility of MoDOT, not the city of Wildwood. So we don't have responsibility for maintaining it. So there would be some coordination involved with MoDOT at that intersection.
Probably ready, babe.
And then obviously the city limit is nearby as well. So not too much beyond or east of the intersection is the city limit for the city of Ellisville.
If we were to put a no left turn on West Glen Farms Road, are you saying we don't have the authority to do that unilaterally? We'd have to get MoDOT's approval to do that?
That's correct, sir. We would have to work with MoDOT on that restriction and be sure they're agreeable to it being enacting so that signs could be placed on essentially on their right of way.
Thank you, Rick.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Thank you, Mayor Boland. I was going to ask a similar question and also let council know that this has been a request for 4.5 years from me to get a no left turn sign there. So I'm hopeful that we can have some conversations fairly early in 2021 to get this moving forward. It's a simple request. I don't think it's a major impact to MoDOT or the traffic flow. It actually improves the traffic flow because we have things stalled as on 100 for residents to get off of 100 onto West Glen Farms because people are trying to make their left-hand turns and kind of messing up that whole intersection. So I think from a safety standpoint and a traffic flow standpoint, we need to get on to MoDOT to get approval to do that ASAP. I would hope, this keeps getting bounced from year to year. I would hope from a safety standpoint, we'd move forward on that. Number two, I wanted to tell Julian and the city administrator, thank you for including the EDC informational page into the agenda. I think that's important that all of the council members have a chance to review that information, even if you're not on economic development. There's a lot of activities that have been going on this year just to provide support to those businesses that we do have. And because of the work that Julian's been doing in that area, as well as the economic development team members, I think we've been able to ease the pain for many of our businesses this year. So kudos to Julian and the work that he's been doing this past year. And then one last thing, just real quickly, the Watershed Erosion Task Force service analysis. Mr. Remy, I just wanted to double check. The final locations have already been identified and those were listed in this report?
Councilmember Remy.
Councilmember Remy, I have a question for you. Can you hear me? I guess I don't know what's with his audio.
We'll have to come back to that, I guess.
Yeah, we can come back to that. That's okay.
So, Rick, relative to the request that's come up before and has been brought up this evening by Council members Bertolino and Dodwell as to this left turn, have we started that process with MoDOT relative to that? And if not, what is required to start that process and when can we get it started?
Well, I did discuss it with Ryan Piercy and I did bring it up with MoDOT within the last couple of weeks relative to the discussion at last council. So Ryan Piercy is aware of it and And we described the situation. As I said in my memo, I was recommending it go to the Board of Public Safety first to get the recommendation to enact the turn lane restriction, and then potentially following that with a formal request to MoDOT. We could do it the other way around if that's the desire. But I did raise the issue with MoDOT. I didn't hear any obvious concerns at this point on their part, but they would certainly have to be
So
involved.
do you think it would increase the likelihood of getting it done if it goes through Board of Public Safety?
Well, we typically run those types of things through Board of Public Safety to get a recommendation from them prior to enacting an ordinance for a turn lane restriction. So that's why I felt that made sense.
So is it your plan to put that on their next agenda or one after or what?
That's what I was recommending in my memorandum, was taking it to the Board of Public Safety in January.
Okay. So since that's under information, I'm assuming unless no one objects, that's what will be done. Is that good with you, Councilmember Bertolino, Councilmember Dodwell?
Yeah, that's fine, Mayor. And I think, Rick, correct me, but I think if it goes through public safety, Board of Public Safety, it carries a little bit of weight because it is a safety issue. It very definitely is a safety issue as opposed to just a traffic congestion issue. There really is a serious accident waiting to happen there. So I think the approach is to go through public safety first and then let Rick take it to MoDOT.
Can we get it on both of their agendas in January? Both committees?
I think there's only one, isn't there, Rick? Board of Public Safety.
Normally, we would take it to Public Safety, get the recommendation out of Board of Public Safety, and then bring it directly to the City Council.
Okay.
Desire to
So
do.
So we could
No.
have that recommendation to us by the second meeting in January then maybe?
I can't speak to the actions of the Board of Public Safety, but I will tell you I will have it on the next meeting. That'll be my plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rick. Anything further from any member of the council on an item under information? All right, seeing none, moving into action items, we have a couple of small ones, I think, and then a rather large one here. So first one is typically at this time of the year, we formally cancel the next meeting in December and try to get as much of that the items done at this meeting and the one following. It's never presented a problem in the past. So I think the recommendation would be to cancel, as we always have, our December 28, 2020 meeting. If there is no objection to that, I would entertain a motion. Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to go ahead and cancel that last meeting in December.
Okay, made by Councilmember Garitano. Councilmember Edens, did I see you second that? Okay, seconded by Councilmember Edens. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Next is the 2021 City Council calendar. Steve Cross, City Administrator, did you want to say anything relative to that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. When we first brought this calendar for the city meetings for the year 2021, that was the first look at the calendar. There were some changes that needed to be made. Some meetings had been moved around a little bit, but the main issue that was left on the table had to do with a no meeting week in the months of June, July, and August of 2021. And when you look at the calendar right now, the staff was successful in finding other homes for some of the meetings in the last week of June, the last week of July, and the last week of August. But I do want to bring to your attention, however, that in the months of June and July, even though they're designated as no meeting weeks, there are no committee meetings that week. They've been moved to other places, but there still is a council meeting in June and July. In August, the last week in August, there are no meetings that week at all. But if any council members were looking to try to move the council meeting that is scheduled for that last Monday in the months of June and July, that would be open for discussion. Otherwise, we'd have that meeting that week, but that there would be no other meetings, no committee meetings during those 2 weeks in those 2 months, June and July.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion, or would someone like to make a motion to approve the calendar as presented? Councilmember McCune makes the motion to present as presented, or to approve as presented. Councilmember McCutcheon seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that takes us to strategic planning. And given some thought to how best we might continue our process with this in a way that recognizes the need to do it on a substantive basis, as well as making sure that we're using everyone's time wisely. And I thought, with respect to the goals and sub-goals, which is the first of our 2 items this evening, the second being the funding source discussion. With respect to the first one, rather than take everyone's time and the public's time going through all 15 of you with your priorities under each one of those, if there's no objection, what I would ask is that between now and, let's say, this Thursday, if you could look at each one of the sub goals under each of the 8 broad goals and prioritize them in the range of 1 being the most important to you, 2, in the case of, for example, financial resource development, we have 3. 3 would be the third one would be your least important. And under public works, we have several. So you would probably, it looks like, have maybe 25 or so that would, number 25 or what have you might be the least important, and forward those to our city administrator. And then, much like he did with the ranking that we worked on at the last meeting, he will assemble the list based on priorities of the sub goals based on everyone's submission. And he will forward that to everyone. And in addition, since we would be doing it by writing rather than at the meeting, for the benefit of the public, I would propose that he also provide a grid that shows everyone's vote on each of those. And then once he has those, we will have our priorities. And I would ask you, I think it's going to take a lot of time if we go through each one of those tonight. And this is not to say that we can't come back at some point and discuss those. I think it would just be helpful to get a broad sweep of the priority of everyone and how they view those things before we get to that point. And in regard, if you agree with this approach, in regard to your prioritization of those, I would encourage you to look at the second attachment that's provided with the work session agenda that relates to the grant, the projects with grants that are in the works, because that might very well affect your prioritization of those items. So to summarize, what I would propose is, again, for efficiency of handling it, is that everyone at this point send to the city administrator by Thursday, if that's agreeable to you, your priority. And I think Councilmember Clark has already submitted hers. I saw that today come across by email. And then he will assemble, the city administrator will assemble those along with a grid that shows how everyone voted, and that will form the basis for future discussion. And please keep in mind the grants that have been allocated relative to those. So Councilmember Edens, I have you. Before I get to you, just 1 second, I want to ask, does that approach sound reasonable to everyone? I'm seeing lots of hands. Yes, and I'm seeing Lauren Edens say no. Councilmember Edens?
Yes, I was just wondering if it would be easier on staff if either Mr. Cross or Mr. Jacqueline just created an online ranking tool very quickly and a link for all the council members, and then it would aggregate the data automatically with our name on it and put it in a chart so Steve wouldn't have to get 16 separate emails.
Julian, what are your thoughts on that, since you're our tech advisor for this evening?
That would be very easy to hold together.
Okay, and thank you for the idea, Councilmember Eden. So Julian and Steve Cross, does that sound like a better logistical approach? I'm seeing, okay. All right, thank you. So we will tweak the idea then, or the approach with that in mind. Thank you again, Councilmember Edens, for that suggestion. Councilmember Bertolino?
Yeah, there are a number of items on here, Jim, that are obviously no cost, just administrative. And I'm sorry if I missed this in the conversation earlier, but do they have to be on the priority, or can we have a sort of a separate section that says, these are really good ideas, they don't cost anything, they're basically staff time or committee time? Do we do those separately or not?
Well, actually, I don't know that we would need to do them separately, because it could be the case that even though something is not a budget, is not going to affect the budget directly in a material sense, it might be the case that one or more of you simply don't want to, don't want to prioritize it very high or whatever. So I don't, unless someone has a different view of that, I would say we keep them, I would suggest we keep them all under the category and prioritized. However, to your point, and I guess I'll throw this out for your consideration, I was thinking that it might be helpful if before the council completes, so in other words, while Julian or whomever is putting together the online voting mechanism, if Steve Cross could forward to the council members this same list of things that you need to prioritize with indication as to whether they are going to cost anything or not, and also indicate to make it a little easier for you which of these sub-goal items have the grants that are part of that, so that you don't have to sort through 3 or 4 different pages. You can just look at it, one page snapshot. You can see, okay, this one has a grant, this one doesn't, this one's going to cost something, this one isn't. So if there's no objection, I would suggest that we have the city administrator do that as soon as he can. But then back to your question, Councilor Bertolino, I wouldn't have a problem segregating the no budget items, but my initial reaction, at least at this point, would be to keep them all together, but whatever the council wants to do. So is everyone, would that help everyone to have an indication, a sheet that shows these sub goals as to, number one, whether they are implicating the budget in terms of a cost, and number two, whether they have a grant or likely will have a grant associated with them? Would that help everyone when you're
That's
making?
an excellent idea.
Okay, so I'm seeing heads yes, and Councilor
Yes.
Dodwell. So Steve, if you could do that as soon as possible, we'll go forward with that. Okay, Councilor Bartoni.
Thank you. I was just going to answer your question. Yeah, that would be helpful. I hadn't thought of that, but I like the idea that Dave has there. And I think just this whole project's probably going to be, the more we look at it, we're going to probably take it in a couple different directions before we're finished with it. But I think that's a good idea. And I think that would make it easier for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Edens.
Yes, and I just wanted to make sure that, if I didn't state it last time, that under the economic development list is that it doesn't exclude the previous work program that the committee has already approved. This was just what council members brought up in addition. So I don't know if we need a single line that says maintain current work program. For a lot of folks I know that on the committee, that would be ranked first and everything else is additional.
So we can, without objection, have Julian, or we'll include that specifically. Let me just look here. We can include that specifically on the list, and it might be helpful for the benefit of everyone who is certainly those that are not on that standing committee. If we could get a list of those items and attach to the documents, or to the document that the city administrator sends to everyone, just in case they see any redundancy or what have you.
Okay, perfect. And just so that the rest of the council is aware, there are opportunities to roll at least one of the suggestions into another existing event or a joint event too. So keep that in mind when you're ranking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so without objection, then that's what we will do. So sooner rather than later, you'll be getting a list of these sub-goals that indicate which ones cost, which ones don't, and which ones are which ones implicate grant funding. We'll also add the economic development item that Lauren mentioned, Councilor Edens mentioned, along with a copy of that plan so that everyone can have access to that. So everyone good with that? And then just lastly, if you could, assuming Steve gets this to everyone tomorrow, if you could get your, and we'll have the instructions to you as to how to complete your survey. If you could do that by Thursday, say close of business, that would be great. So we can keep the process moving. Councilmember Dodwell, I see your hand.
I was just going to ask if that gives the city staff that you've just given tasks to enough time to complete the work that we've asked them to do, or if they would like to make it for the following week, that we send in our final and that they have until Monday or Tuesday next week to give us their report structure.
Julian, Steve, what are your thoughts?
I'm the one that has to go through these items and identify which ones have costs and so forth. Tomorrow may have been a little bit tight, but it may roll into Wednesday, which may then give council an extra day perhaps to do the ranking. But to go through each one of these and identify which ones. Now, the schedule I'm going to put together will simply indicate if it has a cost or not. It won't indicate what that cost is, but it'll just say it's a cost item or it's not a cost item, as Mr. Berlino was suggesting. And then those that have grant implications. So it might take until Wednesday for me to get that done, but I don't think I need the whole week to accomplish that task.
Julian, the online mechanism, how long do you think that'll take you to put together?
Once Steve's list is complete, it might take me an hour, maybe two, to pull that online form.
Why don't we do this then? Why don't we give them a little more time, to Councilor Dodwell's point, and if the council will give you the weekend to think about things, how about next Monday, a week from today at 5 p.m. with your responses? Everyone good with that? Okay.
We'll have our information out to council midweek, something like that. That would be our plan.
Okay, so that takes care of, or will take care largely. And again, to Councilor Bartoni's point, this is going to be somewhat of a fluid process, although we are accomplishing a lot, I think, but this doesn't mean, as I mentioned earlier, that we can't come back and revisit these before the plan is finally approved by the council. So that takes us to funding source discussion. And as you know, I mentioned this in my mayor's report of Friday, and I also prepared a memorandum for you that I hope helped your consideration of the money. And I did my best with respect to that memo to set forth how I think to handle this most efficiently. The discussion should go. And so it would start with, and I picked out, as you know from that memo, the 3 items of the 8 goals: goal 1, rural internet; goal 2, watershed erosion; and goal 7, Lake Chesterfield, for purposes of this, principally because unlike the public works items, unlike most of the economic development items, these are what I would call extraordinary items that you don't, in other words, one-off items that they may, once they're done, never come back for consideration, whereas public works are kind of always in the mix. And number 2, they have very large price tags. Related to that, we have a group, as you know, that's looking at rural internet. We have a group that is also looking at watershed erosion. And as you may know, the watershed erosion group is recommending that we go to our residents to obtain funds to move forward. However, we've got other things in the mix. And so the first thing, as I indicated in the memo, that I think would be helpful just to get the discussion started, and I'm going to ask Joe Vinich if he can give us his best guess. I think it would be helpful for the council to know generally relative to these three extraordinary items, and we can start with rural internet, regardless of who pays for it. What do you think, as you sit here today, Joe, relative to rural internet, the ticket cost is for that one?
Comparing the three proposals that the city received and comparing them apples to apples, the cost will range between $4.5 million to $10 million.
Okay. So 4.5 to 10 million. Same question relative to watershed erosion.
In consultation with John Jones of Right Water Engineers, a typical project like the Strecker Road Cutbank, which was done a number of years ago, adding a multiplier to that, it's about $750,000 per project, generally speaking. So if we have a list of 3 priority projects, that will be in the range of about 2.2 million.
Okay. And last, Lake Chesterfield. And for purposes of this one, I would ask you to assume what I would anticipate being one of the more reasonable options to resolve that situation, which would be the infill of the northern portion of the lake that is presenting all the issues, so that the lake would remain without leaks, but it wouldn't be quite as big. So for the infill, and this would be a budding Pierside Lane that is the current street and that dams that. So what would you're assuming that is the option that would be taken with respect to that? What would your guess be relative to the cost for that?
Well, I'd like Rick Brown to kind of maybe fact check me, so to speak, but that of the 3 projects is the least expensive, and I would hope that it would be somewhere between $400,000 to $600,000.
Rick Brown, anything you want to add?
I think that's probably reasonable. It might be less, but I think that's a reasonable number to at least use.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
You're welcome.
Okay, so just bear with me a moment. So essentially, it looks to me like the range for all 3 of these would be somewhere between 7.1 million in total and 12.8 million. And Ken, Councilor Remy, I have you down. Just give me 1 second here. So those are the amounts. Now, before we go to the next part of this, we have 2 hands up. I want to see kind of what their points are at this point. Councilor Rambo, you were first, so go ahead.
Yes, very quickly. Another expenditure that seems to me to meet your extraordinary criterion is the deer management problem. We could spend significant funds on that. Granted, the costs are all over the map right now, but did you consider that when you made these 3 goals, or is that another one that we should add, or should we just kind of wait for clarity on that?
You answered the question right there. I did consider it, but I didn't have enough clarity to justify in a concrete sense putting it here for discussion, because I think, just like you pointed out, the potential expense for that being all over the map, that probably means the council's discussion would be all over the map. And so I think it would be better if we waited until we got something more concrete relative to that. But once we do, I think the same analysis might very well apply in terms of
all right,
that we're getting ready to undertake at this point. But thank you for raising that. Councilmember Remy.
Can you just repeat the question again to the watershed erosion task force so I can understand the question? Because the numbers that were provided we're a bit low for what I'm aware of for the entire rectification of the problems.
And that was the question, the entire rectification, and Joe's answer was around 2.2 million.
So with due respect to Mr. Vunich, maybe we're talking about just a couple projects, but the estimate that I am under the impression to rectify the current watershed problems are anywhere in order from 19 million to $33 million in consultation with our consultants. So that there's a huge discrepancy there.
Joe?
Mr. Mayor, there's not. I calculated the cost with John Jones based upon the first 3 projects, which are the top priority.
Okay.
Thereafter, we would have to add in the additional 9 projects, which would probably get us in that range that Dr. Remy just mentioned. Thank you.
That's why I wanted to clarify. Sorry about that, Mr. Vunich. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that that was just for those projects and not for the whole issues that we're talking about here.
Okay, so Councilor Remy, then I would ask you, relative to the discussion that the council is getting ready to have as to the funding source for that, do you want to include the small number or do you want to include the large number? And there's no right or wrong answer to that at this point.
I would use the larger number because we're trying to assess best ways to attack this problem over the next 10 years and looking at revenue sources that may be helpful to get there. I'd rather the public be aware of the full gravity of the issue.
Okay, so what was your range again?
I would leave that to Mr. Vunich. He might be better to answer that, but I was informed between 19 and $33 million. It's a large range depending on the projects that are undertaken.
Mr. Mayor, that was my understanding. It again just depends on the gravity of the situation at the time we finally get there. Plus, again, just the bidding process, which is always difficult to ascertain.
I think with due respect, Councilor Dodwell, I've got you here. Just give me 1 second there. I think with due respect, it's much like we were talking about with the deer management issue. I think it's going to make it difficult for the council to have a good discussion about funding source with that kind of a range. I mean, that's potentially 3 times the entire amount of the city's total budget versus something that, you know, may not be. So is there a way, and I don't want to put you, Councilor Remy or Joe, on the spot at this point, but for purposes of this discussion, as we sit here today with a 5-year strategic plan, this isn't a 10-year or a 20-year, but for 5 years out, reasonably speaking, what would be, can you narrow that for the benefit of everybody so we can have a cogent discussion? Because I just think that's getting us into all over the board stuff, I think.
Well, again, Mr. Mayor, with your permission, the department selected the top 3 priority projects because even if we were to start immediately, it's typically a year of planning, design, and engineering, then construction, and then the cycle starts over. So even if we were lucky enough to fund the 3 projects, it would take us through that 5-year cycle easily, I think.
And Ken, what was your low number again, the low side?
19 million. So conservatively, if 5 years we were attempting to tackle some of these projects above the 3, I don't think it's unrealistic to think about perhaps 3 times that, or $9 to $10 million, because the 10-year might reach the other issues.
Okay, so we'll use 9 to 10 then for purposes of this discussion.
I think that's reasonable, unless Mr. Vunich might disagree. At least it gives us a target.
Sir, I'll defer to your judgment on that point. Thank you.
Okay, so that's what we'll do, which takes us to a low for all 3 of these of 14.1 to a high of 20.8, I believe, million. Okay, Councilmember Bertolino.
I'm sorry, Jim, did Katie have her hand up first?
I think you were first.
All right, very quickly, 2 issues. One is a question, one's a comment. Question is to either Joe or to Steve Ross. the difference between a NID and a SID. And the reason I ask is that on these 3 high priority items, 2 of them, obviously the internet and the Lake Chesterfield, are very resident specific. They don't really enhance the whole community. They are very specific to certain regions of the city. So our NIDs and SIDs perhaps a better approach, like we did with sewers. It was just a very select number of residents who benefited from that. Then the last one then is the watershed. And if we use NIDs or SIDs for the first 2 priorities, does that free up more of our general operating dollars to tackle the watershed problem?
I would defer to Steve Cross to, I guess, if my answer is incorrect, but I think it would free up dollars to do that. Certainly, the less encumbered you make the city expenses for any project, more money is going to exist for other things such as watershed and erosion. I'm just going to, what I'm getting ready to say, I'm just saying as a matter of information from based on comments I've heard. I'm not expressing an opinion one way or the other, or intending to disagree at all, Councilor Bertolini, with what you said. I guess I would say 2 things. Number one, I think it's possible that someone who is affected by rural internet in particular, and potentially Lake Chesterfield, could argue that there is a citywide effect in terms of the reputation that it does to the city, that hurts everyone's property values because people think we don't have internet and that sort of thing. And I also think, contrary-wise, there are people who don't live next to a stream or don't cross a bridge that could argue, I haven't seen anything that's going on with, watershed issues. And so that too is unique to residents. It's not a city thing. So there are different ways that all 3 of these can be viewed. And certainly with respect to your point about SIDS and so forth, we're shortly going to get into that mix. I just mentioned that so that we are aware that depending on where a person lives and depending on whether they have internet service and depending on whether that lake stays or doesn't, they all can have differing views relative to those 3. That's all. Just FYI. Councilor Dodwell, thank you for being patient.
Not a problem. I was going to ask similar information that Mr. Bertolino just asked about, because I think we're not at the point yet where we're going to identify funding sources for any of this yet. But we do need to get creative in how we go about obtaining additional funds to complete all the work that we want to have done, and also make sure that the residents feel like they're being treated fairly throughout the city. So I concur with that. The other thing I just wanted to mention was, I don't think at this point we know what the impact is going to be from the fixes as far as the watershed erosion task force improvements go. If we do these first 3 high priorities and they are successful, then there may be some downstream, upstream improvements that automatically take place over a number of years after those improvements are made. So I just want to make sure that we are keeping an eye open to not immediately say we have to do absolutely everything when we don't know whether the high priority improvements are going to reduce the influx of water further downstream and therefore reduce the problems that we have. That may not be the case. I'm not advocating it, but I like the fact that we are taking steps to mitigate the most severe first up, and then I'll be very interested in seeing how those outcomes impact everything else within that watershed.
Thank you. Councilmember Remy.
I appreciate the council member's comment, and certainly we're hopeful as well, but just in full clarity, we're not talking about all of our watersheds at once. We're talking about key areas that may impact actually one of the creeks more than the others. And so It's unlikely that you'll influence upstream or downstream if you're fixing parts of the Cox Creek by Elegant Child and Anniversary Park, and the impact upon Bonham Creek is probably unlikely. And so many of these projects, unfortunately, are set in motion that are going to need some attention at some point.
I wasn't trying to discount that. I realize there are many different arms to the watersheds that we're dealing with. I just want to make sure that as we're going through this process that we evaluate the improvements made and their impact on the overall watershed. I'm hopeful, and hopeful doesn't always bear fruit, that what we do now will have a positive impact going forward.
We don't disagree with you. I agree with you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we basically have, and again, this can change, but I think everyone at this point has a fairly good idea of, best and worst case scenarios in terms of the range, which again, 14.1 mil to 20.8 mil. Okay, so as I set forth in the memo, the next part, now that we have the identification of the funds, the next task in this discussion is to get a gauge of the council relative to the three options that exist with respect to all or some of these. And we're going to come back to all or some shortly, but for the moment, relative to all or some of these, as I point out on the top of page 2 of that memo, there are three options. In essence, the city provides no funding. Number 2, the city provides some funding. Number 3, the city provides all of the funding. Those are the three options. And the next part of that memo sets forth options that exist, and Councilmember Bertolino has already brought up one in the case of the city not providing any funding. For example, the use of a CID, Community Improvement District, or Neighborhood Improvement District. And just as a caveat, I want to mention that if the council determines, for example, with all or some of these, that might be the way to go, it is possible that the city, with the council's blessing, could provide resources, our city attorney helping provide templates and so forth to keep the cost of formation and maybe some assistance with management and that sort of thing, but that's different than actually providing the hard dollars for example, rural internet. If the city decides, or if the council decides that the city should provide all or some of the funding, then I did my best to list in the latter part of that memo on page 2, the 8 options rather, that could occur relative to that funding being provided. We could, for example, increase, and it could be all or some of these, increase our revenue through having budget neutral events and programs, and we have a committee, as you know, looking at that. We could reallocate existing funds, as Councilmember Bertolino brought up earlier, from one program to watershed erosion or rural internet. We could obtain grants, assuming they're available. We could issue bonds, form of borrowing with interest. We could recommend a stormwater park sales tax. That's currently been recommended actually by the Watershed Erosion Task Force. We could recommend the approval of increasing the existing utility tax that we all see on our electric and other bills. We could recommend a sales tax, and we could recommend a real estate tax. Any of the tax items, and John Young, I'm going to ask you, so get ready here in a second. Any of the tax items would need to have voter approval. My question for you, City Attorney Young, relative to the issuance of bonds, would that require voter approval or not?
It depends on the type of financing that is done. Generally, if the property is not owned by the city, yes, it is likely that a voter approval would be necessary.
Okay, so I think given that we don't own any of the property associated with Lake Chesterfield, rural internet, or watershed erosion, to speak of anyway, maybe some with watershed erosion, we should assume that a bond offering would also require voter approval. Okay.
Now,
Go ahead,
It
John.
might qualify, that is only if they are city-issued bonds that are supported by general obligation, so city taxes. If you've got a NID or CID, that'd be a different story.
Yeah, so I'm only talking about us issuing the bonds, not the neighborhood improvement district or the community improvement district, but thank you for that caveat. Okay, so back to the top. The next item generally is 1, 2, or 3. What's the flavor of the council in terms of as to all or some of these 3 extraordinary items? The city either 1 provides no funding and we go to maybe promoting a SID or a neighborhood improvement district or looking at other avenues, grants and so forth. Number 2, the city provides some funding, or number 3, with the amount to be determined at some point here, or 3, the city provides all of the funding. And I think it would be helpful for this discussion as we start to peel the onion, so to speak, if at this point we get at least your tentative view, and no one's going to be locked into this until it's all said and done and the votes are taken on the specific items, but in general, among those 3, what the flavor of the council is as to all or some of these. And before we ask for that, we got a couple of hands. Councilor Garitano.
I just wanted to bring up, because some of these options do require voter approval, but I would like to get clarification, I guess maybe from the city attorney, but we've got in our Wildwood code that there would also need to be another type of voter approval, because anytime we have a capital improvement project that is over $3.5 million, requires a vote of the people. And I believe the full cost of all the work needs to be factored in. So that was last amended by the voters in 2018, where that number was brought up to 3.5 million. But again, my question is that another level of voter approval that needs to be happening as well for any of projects that are over 3.5 million?
Great question. Without objection, City Attorney Young.
Depending upon the cost, as you mentioned, it was 3.5 million when it was approved in 2018, and it does increase annually. But yes, if the amount of the project, the discrete project, exceeds that dollar amount, a vote under the charter would be necessary, yes.
And a follow-up to Councilmember Garitano's question, John, would it not be the case that, well, I guess it's a 2-part question. Let's just say hypothetically that the determination would be made to have a sales tax for one of these projects and one of these projects that the city's going to pay for exceeds the 3.5 mil as adjusted. They could both be on the same ballot, I'm assuming. Is that correct? So you'd have the voter approval of the sales tax in one bracket, and then you would have the voter approval of the charter provision, or the approval required by the charter provision. Is that correct?
It is possible, yes. It depends on the taxing mechanism and the specificity of the ballot language required in the statute, but it's quite possible we could do that, yes.
Okay. Councilor McCune.
Okay, I just have one question, Mayor. You brought up the, I guess, the cost and the cost sharing, and I just use like Chesterfield as an example. So if we did a cost sharing measure, would we, I guess in this instance, or rural internet, however you want to apply it, would we go after the easement first and then do the cost sharing, or how would that work? I guess I'm just trying to understand from, easements to voter approval, or how does that work? I know that Lake Chesterfield's the least expensive of them all, but I would think that the city would want the land, and then they can do the improvements without voter approval. Would that be accurate?
Not necessarily. The city could negotiate that, or negotiate a lease for the resulting ground that would occur by virtue of the infill, or the city could not ask for any of that. So that would remain to be determined relative to the the project. And to the question, moving into rural internet, for example, it is possible. Again, we haven't even remotely got yet to the terms of any deal. Obviously, that's a long ways down the road. But for example, if the city, in the case of rural internet, and actually you could probably do the same thing in the case of watershed erosion, although it'd be a little more indirect. But in the case of rural internet, if the city chose to fund all or part of that, the city, as part of that transaction, could include a charge for users of that over time, $2 a month, $5 a month, or whatever, that would allow the city to recoup all or some of the expense for that. So the question that we're getting to initially is the outlay of city funds, the terms of the deal of those outlays in terms of what the city gets in return, if anything, and how we would go about it, when we would go about it, and the scope of it, and all those things have obviously yet to be worked out. This is more this evening of a philosophical, I mean, we all, I think these questions are great because it'll give you some meat on the bone, so to speak, in terms of where you think you might come down on these. Let's just put it this way. There are a lot of options with cost recoupment. There are a lot of options, or some options with respect to, requesting and obtaining deeds, maybe even owning the internet equipment, for example, all those things. But I think right now, for purposes of strategic planning, it's going to help the council and me if we have an understanding of where you stand relative to the three choices.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. So you might have answered part of my question there. What I was going to ask is, of these three options, not provide any, provide some, provide all, my question is that, are you asking those questions with the current financial situation? Or because if we get additional sources of revenue, whether that's, a bond or a SID or a NID or tax increase or whatever, that answer could change, because it could be, one of those options could be X amount of money, and then the other option could be 10 times X the amount of money.
That's a great question. I would submit that the question as to these three options should be addressed as we sit here today with the lay of the land as we know it, on the reasonable assumption that after the COVID situation ends, things will probably improve. But I think that it's incumbent, because it's time, this is the time we do the strategic plan, and we look at it in the window that we see today. And if the council decides down the road, if it wants to change its plan, it can do that. But I think to base the decision that we're looking at making, the decisions that we're looking at making now relative to the 5-year strategic plan, on things that might get worse down the road or things that might get better down the road, I mean, we simply don't have the benefit of that foresight. We don't know. So really, the only option left is making it based on what we know today, as we sit here today. But that's a great
fair
question.
enough.
Okay. Councilmember Bertolino.
Thanks, Jim. You made a comment, Jim, and I just want clarification. And the clarification is, did I hear you correctly saying the city could issue bonds like for the internet, and we could impose a utility tax on those users to recoup the cost of the bonds without a vote of the public? Did I hear you correctly?
So it wouldn't be, and John Young, you might want to help on this one. I don't think it would be a tax on the internet, rural internet users. It would be, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just you. So I don't think it would be a tax. It would be, like a user fee. But John, I think you might be the better person to answer Councilmember Bertolino's question.
Well, the question of whether something is a tax or a fee is fact specific that we'll have to review, and we're getting a little bit into the weeds without all the facts at this point, but you can charge a user fee without voter approval. meaning you're deferring the actual cost for the service being provided in very simplistic terms. The second you start making revenue off it, it's a tax, and that does require voter approval.
If I may, Jim, just one quick follow-up. Should we, in this discussion, Jim, about the no funding, some funding, or all the funding, should that be specific to each of the three major categories? Or are you looking at overall, our consensus is we want one of the three, no funding, some funding? What I think just in our discussions, I'm kind of leaning towards each one of these three key items we may have to approach separately or differently. Should we have our vote, if you will, about no funding, some funding, or all funding is specific to that key priority?
I'm smiling because I debated with myself that very question probably more than any other as I was putting this together. And I ultimately concluded that at least initially, it would be best to have the general discussion and sort of a tentative show of hands as to where the council stands in general relative to public participation by the city or not, and if so, to what degree, because it is possible that all of you may decide we don't want the city paying for any of this. And if that's the case, then we don't even get to the next three. But so I debated that issue, whether to go to the next, to have the discussion one-on-one with each of these or to do it generally. And where I came down for that reason primarily was to have the general discussion conceptually and philosophically as to all three. And then once that's determined, if it is determined that there is sentiment on the part of the council by a majority to pay for, to some degree or another, some of these, then we get to the 1, 2, and 3 of those. Councilmember Brost.
Yeah, Jim, with respect to your question, I would say, I think it leads, I don't want to say the obvious answer, but because it maybe it is to me, but I think the city provides some of the funding. I don't think the city can provide all the funding. And I think we need to do better than providing no funding. So, and then I think as we drill down to the specific items, I think the NIDS and the SIDS and what tax or fee is best utilized to make it feasible is then the next layer. But I do think we fall into number 2, and each one will have a different maybe makeup of a solution. But my comment is number 2.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Brost. And so we're now just past 7 o'clock. And obviously, we have our council meeting that starts, and I have two more council members who's raised their hand, Councilmember Eden and Councilmember Nyan. And I didn't expect that we would get to a vote on this evening. And in fact, after we hear from these two council members, I would submit that this might be a good time for us to end the work session and take it up at the next council meeting. That will give you an opportunity to reflect on the numbers you've heard this evening, the points that have been made by members of the council, our city attorney, and so forth. So there's not a rush. There's not a rush that we have to take a vote among these three options tonight. It'd be great if we did, but we don't have to. So I would say if there's no objection, we hear from the two council members on the list, we adjourn the work session, and we take it up in January where we left off, giving you time to think about things. Councilmember Edens.
Sure, I appreciate it. I just wanted to say that I'm fine with, some funding for both the rural internet and watershed erosion. And for Lake Chesterfield, I would support, forming some sort of community improvement, whether it's a NID or SID, with the residents of Lake Chesterfield, but also the other subdivisions that contribute. I believe what we said before was there are 6 subdivisions that are tied in with drainage to that former retention, now detention facility without paying. So there's essentially already free riders without making other taxpayers pay for that. There's also a difference between something like rural internet, which is about access to information and quality of life, versus making something beautified to the point that it exceeds MSD's requirements and becomes a private recreational lake. So I think that if that's something that residents want to do, we can help them essentially form the body that they need to assess themselves and pay for that. And also in terms of watershed erosion, because it's a creek system, the keyword being system, it would be hard to just assess residents for one section of the creek that simply abut it. The other thing too is it's not a matter of just residents that live around the creek, because all of our water runoff and stormwater runoff enters the creek at some point, which means you don't have to live next to the creek to contribute to the problem. So if you're thinking about forming, a community improvement district, well, the reality is every single resident is contributing to whatever, one of the 9 watersheds that they're closest to. So you still have to have every resident that has to pay some portion to fix the creek. So I don't think that that's appropriate. Now, if we get some grant money and federal grants, that would be lovely. I don't know if it'll happen, but that's why my answer is, city pays some, is hopefully that there's another revenue source or, theoretical taxes.
Yeah.
So that's it.
And we're going to get to the 3 in the next step. So this is still just the philosophical broad brush approach here. Councilmember Nyan?
I just had a quick question for clarification on SIDS and NIDS, on those assessments, because my understanding is on the sewer assessment, there are residents that are not paying their sewer assessment. I don't even know if that's correct, but so can you make people pay on these SIDS and NIDS, or is it like my neighbor's paying, but this neighbor's not? Like, that's not fair. How does that work?
John, City Attorney Young.
There is an enforcement mechanism in both the CID Act and in the NID Act for the collection of those who are delinquent or refuse to pay their assessments.
Okay, thank you. That was my question. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Excellent question. Okay, so if there's no objection, and assuming that our agenda for the next work session allows for it, if not, it'll be the one after that, we would continue with phase 2 of strategic plan discussion. And I think all of the discussion we've had tonight will help. And like I said, give everyone the opportunity for the next few weeks to think about philosophically and conceptually where you stand on funding source. And we will have a vote on that, hopefully near the beginning of the next work session item where we're looking at strategic planning. So is that approach okay with everyone? All right, so with that, I don't think we have anything further. I would ask for a motion to adjourn the work session made by Councilmember Galani, seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. Non-debatable, all in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so we are now at 7 minutes after 7. Do you want to take a few minutes break, or do you want to go right into the meeting?
I see, we just go.
All right. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, December 14, 2020. Ms. Elders, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Bullen.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Boat. Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Councilmember Nyan.
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Here.
Councilmember Bros.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Remy.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Here.
Okay, welcome again. For those of you who are comfortably able, if you could please stand with me to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the
To the
republic
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
Thank you. Moving next to our minutes and approving of those from the November 23rd, 2020 work session and regular meeting of the council. If no one has any changes or questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Made by Councilmember Clark, second by Councilmember Remy. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion to approve the minutes as presented, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We have no one in council chambers this evening for public participation. No speaker cards, I assume, Ms. Eldridge. And I don't see anyone online. Julian, is that correct?
There is one hand raised on public comment.
Oh, okay, I didn't see that. Who is that?
It looks like Miss Victoria Allen.
Okay, Miss Allen.
I will move her over right now.
Before she begins, just want to mention a couple of things. Public comment is a valuable component of our meeting. Anyone who wishes to speak must complete a speaker card if you're with us here, or indicate by raise hand or otherwise through Zoom that you wish to speak. When your name is called, please state your name and ward. To ensure that all who wish to speak have the opportunity to do so, there is a 5-minute time limitation, and I will let you know when that is reached. If you have any questions for us, please mention that during your remarks and identify the official you would like to respond. That official will make note of it, and at the conclusion of public participation, any official who chooses to respond will have 3 minutes to do so as to all questions directed to that official. The official may choose to respond to your questions after tonight's meeting, and we may post any responses on the City Council page of our website. And finally, please be respectful to others in making your remarks. This means that interrupting others and using profane and abusive language are prohibited. And I want to thank everyone for following these in advance. Miss Allen, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, please go ahead and state your ward.
Dr. Allen. My name is Victoria Allen. I'm from Ward 4. And I was listening to your work meeting, and it was actually refreshing. It was intelligent and it was thoughtful. And you just happened to be addressing all the things that I chose to address tonight. So for a change, we're on the same page. That being said, and you know how I feel about these sidewalks, and I'm going to discuss that briefly. $285,000 for the Callahan sidewalk, and that's very expensive for the fill and pour, which I was told erroneously by both Ward 2 council people was the plan. And how many people would believe what they were told and go on with life? The future sidewalk on the former Springer property, God rest their souls, has been a gigantic water problem for years. The pipe that runs across the front of the property picks up all the water from Strecker Road and the northeast portion of Sunny Ridge subdivision. And it is then moved through a 21-inch pipe and open drains over the Manor property, the Hall property, and a corner of my property. It goes under Timber Ridge and into Cox Creek. The erosion has been a nightmare for the last 20 years from all of that runoff, plus additional. No one was interested at that time. And all of the runoff from the Callahan property is going to go to the same place. You add a sidewalk and that whole portion of Strecker Road will drain into Cox Creek. So you're expressing interest in correcting that problem, but at the same time you're adding to it. So you're going to want to, I hope, reconsider that. And I wanted to talk about Dr. Hammer and his presentation that I'm sure you're all well aware of, and clearly you're right with him. The presentation was November 12th. And in his very kind way, he had some seriously stern words for the city moving forward. He highlights subdivisions that were poorly prepared for construction, and he instructs us when going onto a piece of property to ask this question or these questions. Most importantly, where am I and what is under my feet? I can tell you what's under the feet when I go on my property, and it's seriously eroded karst formation, bedrock from Lake Chesterfield. And Lake Chesterfield has drained on and off for years and continuously for years, and was found going into Lewis Spring. So everybody between Lake Chesterfield and Lewis Spring is underground, is affected in an underground way. I hear my footprint, my footfalls echo through the ground. So on the 25th anniversary of the city, which is almost over now, his recommendation is that you need to recommit to the original intent and purpose of the formation of the city of Wildwood. He helped develop the only soil, land, form-based zoning matrix in the country. And if the zoning matrix is not used, then errors are made and you don't understand why. In Cox Creek, we need to understand the choices and commit the long term to the environmental health and safety of my city. I know you're looking for money, and additionally, his recommendation is to rehab land, and if it's done properly, you can create a carbon sink. A good acre of Missouri prairie will hold 400 tons of carbon. And this ancillary function of the soil could resonate strongly with some of the granting agencies.
So Ms. Allen, you're at your 5. How much more do you have?
I'm finished.
Okay, thank you for being with us this evening. Appreciate it. Happy holidays to you. Julian, do we have anyone else?
There are no other hands raised, but if anybody in the attendees would like to speak, please either raise your hand on Zoom or post in the chat window.
Okay. Don't see any. So moving next to mayor announcements and appointments. One thing I did want to mention under announcements, I just wanted to highlight our Toys for Tots program that is ongoing. Councilmember Edens or Steve Cross, would either of you like to mention something about that for the benefit of our residents and the public?
Just that we would love for you to bring a toy and drop it off in the vestibule at the boxes. There are some downstairs. I believe there's some also upstairs as well. And if you can't make it to City Hall, Metro West is also collecting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Next, under appointments, we have one, as you know, former council member and Commissioner Jeff Levitt had to resign from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I am pleased and honored this evening to submit the name of Patricia Ward, who has been involved in not only her Lake Chesterfield community as trustee, but also various other city events. And she's always, I believe, exercised sound judgment, and I think would be a terrific addition to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if you have any questions relative to this appointment, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve Ms. Ward, made by Councilmember Flasher, seconded by Councilmember McCune. Any discussion on the motion? See no discussion. All in favor of the motion to approve the appointment of Ms. Ward, please say aye.
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 Had a question.
Oh, somebody's got a question. Sorry.
Okay, who has a question? Councilor McCune?
I just wanted to echo what you said about Ms. Ward. I've had the pleasure of working with her at Lake Chesterfield as a trustee, and she's done a lot for the community and will bring a lot of expertise and professionalism to this committee. So thank you for the support, and I really look forward to her being on Planning and Zoning. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. My apology for not seeing your hand. All right, so any other questions or comments? All right, Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to approve the appointment of Ms. Ward to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the unexpired term ending April 2023, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, congratulations to Ms. Ward. Next, public hearings. We have two. Ms. Eldridge, please read PZ 8-20.
20, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, Care Department of Planning, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request to review and consider changes to the list of permitted uses contained in all R residential, C and M zoning district designations of the City of Wildwood zoning ordinance, including the NU non-urban residence district, for the purposes of ensuring the mix of activities are still applicable and suitable for the locations where authorized or allowed. The applicable districts include the following sections of the code. Section 415.090 NU non-urban residence district, section 415.110 R1 1 acre residence district regulations, section 415.120 R1A residence district regulations, section 415.130 R2 residence district regulations, section 415.140 R3 residence district regulations, section 415.150 R4 residence district regulations, section 415.160 R6A residence district regulations, section 415.170 C1 neighborhood business district regulations, section 415.180 C2 shopping district regulations, and section 415.200 M1 industrial district regulations.
Thank you. Joe, two questions. One, do you have anything to add to the the information that's been presented to the council on this? And number two, what, if anything, would you be looking for the council to do relative to PZ 8-20 this evening, if anything?
Mr. Mayor, I do have a very brief presentation on the matter, and once that presentation is concluded, I would respectfully ask City Council to allow the Department of Planning to prepare the necessary legislation. In terms of the presentation, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission has provided for your consideration tonight its letter of recommendation regarding the matters that were just read into the record by the city clerk. At the end of 2019, the Planning and Zoning Commission adopted a work program for it for the upcoming year. One of the items in that 2020 work program was to review all permitted uses in all the R resident districts, C commercial districts, and M industrial districts. The rationale for this review was threefold. Some of the uses listed in the permitted uses categories were obsolete. Some had never been utilized in the city of Wildwood in its first 25 years. And then finally, new trends. After the Planning and Zoning Commission held its public hearing, it followed with a work session to delve deeper into the discussion of the permitted uses in all of these districts, and ultimately submitted to the City Council tonight a favorable recommendation regarding the changes that have been identified in its letter of recommendation. After public comment, the Department of Planning will be available to address any questions or comments regarding the process and the product of this effort of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joe. So do we have any speaker cards, Ms. Eldridge? I don't see any, and I don't see anyone online. Jillian, do we have anyone identified that wishes to speak on this? Okay.
No, I do not.
Thank you. If any member of the council has a question for Joe, now would be the time to ask. Otherwise, would ask for a motion to proceed with the preparation of legislation as requested by the department. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, Joe, I know this came up during teacup discussion. So would PZ 8-20 allow drive-through
no.
food facilities?
No, ma'am. It was a discussion point by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission did not move forward with it. It is an item for further study in 2021.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Brost?
Yeah, I'll just make the motion to prepare the legislation.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second to the motion? Made by Councilmember Brost, seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion, all in favor of the motion to have legislation prepared as requested, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving next, Joe, to Ms. Eldridge, City Clerk, please read the Meckler-Schomstein matter.
Response to a communication from Diana Meckler and Adam Schomstein, 16917 Manchester Road, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040, which is dated October 14th, 2020, regarding St. Louis County's PC 39-94, the Grover Company, amended C8 planned commercial district, town center workplace district, north side of Manchester Road, across from Grover Crossing Drive, street address 16917 Manchester Road, locator number 24B540163, that seeks modifications to the existing site-specific governing ordinance to allow the permitted uses authorized by it to include a store for retail purposes, pet supplies, and a coffee or cafe future phase, along with certain updates if applicable.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to mention relative to this item?
Mr. Mayor, with your permission, I have some images I'd like to share with the City Council and then follow that up with a very, very brief presentation. For the purposes of tonight's discussion, this is the subject tract of land. It is on Manchester Road and fronts onto the new streetscape that the Department of Public Works just completed within the last month or two. The second slide is just a view of the streetscape itself. The next slide, again, a view of the streetscape, sorry. And then here's the site from an aerial perspective. And as you can see, it is in the Grover Historic Community. It's directly north of Grover Crossing, a McBride and Son Homes project, and part of the commercial area in the vicinity of the intersection of Etherton Road and Manchester Road. And to Mr. Jacquin, thank you for your assistance. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the property was purchased by two individuals, both who are in attendance and on screen tonight. They would like to take the former chiropractic office and turn it into a retail facility, and then in phase two, potentially a cafe. Under phase one, the intensity of use is identical to the medical office, so therefore there are no changes required upon the site, particularly given that the parking ratios are identical. The Planning and Zoning Commission considered the conversion of the use and found it acceptable, given again, the intensities are similar and the parking ratios identical. Therefore, they are recommending modifications to the permitted use section of the site-specific ordinance to accommodate the retail aspect, as well as in phase two, the cafe. It would be important to note that once the phase two uses are brought online, the petitioners will be required to submit a site development plan because the parking ratios will increase and require modifications to the site. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, as I mentioned, the two new owners of property are on screen, and after any public comment, the department would be glad to answer any questions or comments anyone might have. Thank you.
And Joe, similar to the last item, is it the case that you would be looking for a motion from the council to proceed with the preparation of legislation relative to this item?
Yes, sir. The department would respectfully request that authorization, and thank you for reminding me.
Oh, you're welcome. Ms. Eldridge, do we have any speaker cards on this item? And I don't think I see anyone online either. Julian, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I do see Drs. Meckler and Schomstein with us this evening. Welcome. Do either of you have anything you'd like to say before we proceed relative to this item?
No, we just wanted to thank everybody for their help because everybody's been super helpful. But a special thank you to Julian and Joe who've really helped us through this process.
Okay, thank you so much, and thanks for being here.
Great, thank you.
Does any member of the council have any questions for Joe? If not, I would ask for a motion. Councilmember Dodwell.
Could you perhaps explain a little bit more than what's in this ordinance that we're seeing tonight, or the P&Z recommendation about what kinds of things you're going to be selling at this location?
So,
what kind of customers you hope to attract?
Yeah, absolutely. So we hope to attract people who are dog lovers primarily. So it's really not going to include cats. So I hope that doesn't hurt us at all. But where it's going to be for dogs. And initially the first phase is going to sell kind of boutique type, just really nice collars, leashes, really nice treats for dogs. But then the second phase is going to be our goal is a cafe where people will be able to sit in kind of an outside area while they drink their beverage and give their dog one of our tasty treats. And so it'll just be kind of, sometimes you just want to spend some time outside with your dog, but there's only so many places to go that allow dogs. So we thought it would be pretty nice. And we hope to attract people that can walk there because you guys just put in that nice sidewalk. So thank you for that as well.
Great. Sounds wonderful.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes, thank you. I've gotten my question answered.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion? Councilmember Galani makes the motion to have.
I'd like to make a motion to draft the legislation, Mr. Vunich, for passage by the council.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Councilmember Garetano. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? All right, Doctors Meckler and Shumstein, thank you so much. Congratulations, and thank you for your interest in our.
Thank you guys. All right, have a good evening.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
All right,
Good
moving
luck.
into legislation. Second readings, Bill 2580 is before the council for final passage. It concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember McCutcheon. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Bartoni. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Did I see a hand on opposed? Okay. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2580.
Bill 2580, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, adopting the municipal budget and capital improvement program for the City of Wildwood for fiscal year 2021, second reading.
Okay, thank you. And I know we've had a lot of discussion on this already. Councilor McCutcheon?
Yeah, just a correction on the capital improvement plan. The street should be Pine Grover Parkway and not Pine Grover Loop.
Okay, we will take that editorially without objection. We can make sure that's made. Thank you, Councilor McCutcheon. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2580.
Councilmember Garetano.
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Councilmember Gross.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Galani.
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Councilmember McCune.
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Okay, bill passes. And Megan, are you going through the roll starting with a different person each time? Are you starting with a different council member each time as we? Okay. Oh, okay, okay. I just thought I saw Councilor McCutcheon being last a couple of times, so I wanted to make sure. Okay, that's fine. All right. Moving next to Bill 2581. It's also before the council for final passage, and it also concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Farmer. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2581.
Bill 2581, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute an addendum to and a renewal of the police service agreement with St. Louis County for the year 2021, second reading.
Okay, thank you. I know we've had discussion on this one previously as well, and I think there was a question about an exhibit. We got that information to everyone. Are there any other questions or discussions on Bill 2581? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2581.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes, and the dog really doesn't have a vote.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Gross,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2581 has passed. Moving next to Bill 2582. It's also here for second reading and final passage, and it concerns all wards as well. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Brost. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2582.
Bill 2582, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute certain public roads, rights of way, and parks maintenance agreements on behalf of the City of Wildwood with certain contractors for public roads, rights of way, and parks maintenance within the city, second reading.
Thank you. Rick, anything further you want to mention relative to Bill 2582?
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm certainly available for any questions from the council. Thank you, though.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions for Rick? Seeing no questions or discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2582.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy. Was that yes?
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2582 passes. Last of the second readings, Bill 2583 is before the council for final passage, and it also concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Remy. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2583.
Bill 2583, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to execute a third amendment to an existing contract with Dr. David Hammer for the provision of ongoing professional services in support of the Watershed Erosion Task Force's efforts to address problem areas within this community's 9 watersheds, second reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything further you want to mention relative to Bill 2583?
Yes, sir. Just a couple of things, please. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, at tonight's work session, the department did provide the requested breakdown of services associated with the consulting team that is assisting the Watershed Erosion Task Force. I hope that was acceptable. And then finally, there have been no changes to the bill since its introduction, but I'd be glad to try to answer any questions or respond to comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dodwell.
Joe, I wanted to thank you very much as not being an active member in the Watershed Erosion Task Force. It was very helpful to be able to read through the concise information that you provided to all of council. I think it was very beneficial that we all got brought up to speed in the same format. So thank you very much for your work on that.
It was my pleasure, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2583.
Member Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nian,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2583 is passed. Moving into first readings, Bill 2584 is before the council and it concerns Ward 5. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? We have a Councilmember Bertolino, seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2584.
Bill 2584, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, formally accepting public space dedications to the community set forth in the Villages at Brightleaf subdivision, Plat 1, Plat Book 365, pages 622 through 627, Plat 2, Plat Book 366, pages 282 through 285, and Plat 3, Plat Book 366, pages 497 through 503, at the time of approvals and recordings on December 10th, 2017, July 17th, 2018, and November 19th, 2020, respectively, which equates to a total area of 7.7 acres, which includes multiple use trail improvements and passive open areas bordering the Wildwood Greenway corridor. First reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything further you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2584?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a brief summary. When the Villages at Brightleaf was approved for development, a requirement in the site-specific ordinance was compliance to the zoning ordinance public space requirements. In this particular instance, the developers, Fisher Frictal and Consort Homes, are submitting for the city's consideration 7.7 acres of the overall site. The majority of the acreage is along State Route 100 from Taylor Road on the east to State Route 109 on the west. That particular area of public space borders the Wildwood Greenway Corridor Trail. Another important component of the public space is the area that was formerly to be Pond Grover Loop Road, now Pond Grover Parkway. That area was dedicated for the purposes of a multiple use trail that hopefully will eventually extend to Green Pines Drive and the new Green Pines Park. If there are any questions at this time, the department would be glad to respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe? All right, seeing none, the bill will be on the council's agenda for its next meeting. Moving next to Bill, well, let me ask you this, Joe, since we're not meeting until January, is there any need, depending on what's being done with these, to have a second reading on this evening?
I'm certain that Fisher Frictal would appreciate a second reading so as the property could transfer, and hopefully they may not have to pay property taxes this year on it.
Okay, so would someone like to make a motion for a second reading? Maybe Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. This will take a 2/3 vote. We'll try it by voice to start with. All in favor of the motion for second reading, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, I think we have the 2/3. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2584.
Bill 2584, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, formally accepting public space dedications to the community set forth in the Villages at Brightleaf Subdivision, Plat 1, Plat Book 365, pages 622 through 627, Plat 2, Plat Book 366, pages 282 through 285, and Plat 3, Plat Book 366, pages 497 through 503, at the time of approvals and recordings on December 10th, 2017, July 17th, 2018, and November 19th, 2020, respectively, which equates to a total area of 7.7 acres, which includes multiple use, trail improvements, and passive open areas bordering the Wildwood Greenway corridor. Second reading.
Thank you, Ms. Eldridge. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2584.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2584 is passed. Takes us to Bill 2585. It's also before the council concerning Ward 5. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2585.
Bill 2585, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to execute a use and maintenance agreement with the Villages at Brightleaf Homeowners Association, which sets forth parameters for the care and upkeep of certain private improvements located on city-owned public space that were set forth as part of the platting of this 192 residential lot subdivision for enhanced main access for the subdivision from Taylor Road and State Route 100. First reading.
Thank you. Joe, anything you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2585?
Mr. Mayor, with your permission, I just have two quick images I'd like to show for the benefit of City Council. The first is the flat plan for the area in question, again, at the main entry into the Villages at Brightleaf, Taylor Road and State Route 100. You can see the improvements that have been installed. And then the next slide, if Mr. Jacqueline would assist, is a rendering of the design that was provided to our Architectural Review Board and Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you, Mr. Jacqueline. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the agreement was originated by the development entity's attorney. Our city attorney has reviewed it and provided comments. Those comments were forwarded to the developer's attorney and incorporated into the agreement. The intent of the agreement is to ensure that the homeowners association maintains those improvements that will reside on City of Wildwood public space. If there are any questions, Mr. Young, our city attorney, and I would be available. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bertolino?
Yeah, Joe, in terms of the build out of Brightleaf, how close are they to actually having homeowners association elected trustees and turning it over to the homeowners?
I believe Fisher and Fricktoller have 10 or less lots remaining to be built upon, and the majority of them are on the westernmost end, the detached villas. And I believe Consort Home is around 20 or 25 lots remaining. So at this stage, there should be at least one homeowner that is on the board.
Is that true at this point? Is there one?
I don't know, but I can check and find out for the city council and send you all an email with the results of the investigation.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Councilor McCutcheon?
Yeah, Joe, during the architectural review, the leaf logo on the tower was supposed to be lit. Is that actually going to take place? And if so, who's going to be responsible for paying the utility bill? Will that be the homeowners?
The homeowners association would be responsible for the electric bill, and I will check to make sure what the architectural review board got recommended got incorporated into the design and is functional. Thank you for letting me know.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes, two things. Number one, does the improvements, do the improvements affect any trees that'll be removed or any kind of bushes around that area that might affect noise levels?
Well, prior to the development of the public space, Fisher Frickel and Consort Homes did remove a great deal of bush honeysuckle. And I know that opened up the area, at least from a visibility standpoint, and probably for the transmission of noise or sound. But they retained all the large trees. That was a condition of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And for the most part, improved the aesthetics substantially at the entry. The issue of noise relative to the roadway, that'll be coming back to the Planning and Parks Committee in early 2021 with hopefully the assistance of Dr. Thunder, our acoustical specialist and consultant.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you, Joe. Is this agreement between the city and the HOA similar to agreements we've had with other subdivisions?
I believe so, but I would ask Mr. Young to comment probably on that more so than I.
Mr. Young?
It is similar in substance and form to other use and maintenance agreements we have with other subdivisions, yes.
Okay, seeing no further questions, Bill 2585 will be on the council's agenda for its next meeting. Moving next and finally to Bill 2586, it's before the council for first reading, and it concerns Ward 1. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Brost. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2586.
Bill 2586, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to execute a consultant services agreement with CDG Engineers Incorporated for the final design of bridge number 386 and bridge number 387 located on Wild Horse Creek Road in the city of Wildwood.
Okay, thank you. Rick, do you have anything you would like to mention further relative to Bill 2586?
Thank you, Mayor. I do not, but I am available for any questions from the City Council.
Okay, any questions for Rick? All right, seeing none, it will be on the agenda. I'm sorry, Councilmember Clark.
Yes, Rick, I noticed that on Bridge 387, they have listed 4 meetings available for property owners to meet with them. And for a total of 12 hours. And then on 386, 5 meetings for a total of 22 hours. I guess I don't know how, why we have so many more hours per meeting for Bridge 386 than we do 387.
I don't know that I can get too far into the specifics on that line item. They generally, at my request, include time for meetings, whether it's with staff or with property owners as we move through the process of designing the project. We anticipate for meetings. And when we get into further discussions with property owners, it becomes essential that they're part of those meetings. So they do their best to estimate the level of effort for those items relative to the scope of work, and that's what's been provided. I can certainly do some checking on that in the meantime, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could just check on that and then get an email to everyone, Rick, that would be helpful.
Sure thing.
Councilmember Clark, go ahead.
Yes, I had another question for you. We discussed earlier in the week about the traffic speed and how that might be affected by improving the bridges in that area. Of course, the bridges need to be improved, but is there any way we can evaluate how much that's going to affect the traffic, the speed in that area, and increase the safety issues? And is there anything we can do about it?
Well, as you know, we met with Mr. Craig Bigner, and that was one of the three concerns, more or less, that he stated. We will do our best to try to address that. As I said at the meeting, it's a bit of a trade-off in terms of we've provided shoulders on the plans, which will be a benefit for cyclists, for pedestrians. We're proposing to put back in a 2-lane bridge instead of a single-lane bridge. So there's safety improvements that are being provided. It's kind of a balance between those things and the potential for some increase of speeds in the location of the project. As I said at the meeting, I don't expect it to be an impact much beyond the limits of the project itself. I don't know there's a way to estimate the degree of the increase, if there's one, but I do believe overall that the project will provide a public benefit and an increase in public safety after the construction has been completed. Again, I'm open for suggestions, and I will talk further with our consultant CDG relative to any ideas they may have to address that concern. If there's things that we can do, like implement a roundabout, potentially, we'll take a look at it, but I'm afraid that a lot of those kind of solutions are going to cost additional monies that we don't currently have budgeted.
I understand that, but I think that I would appreciate that if we could look into it, because, you know, I think we can measure everything and maybe come up with a solution that would slow the traffic down without having a 1-lane bridge. And one more thing, Mr. Bidner had mentioned that he had made a lot of improvements around his land, and a suggestion that maybe we get a list from him of all the swells and the culverts and the improvements that he made so that the developers know exactly what he's already done and not destroy what he has built up so far.
Councilmember Clark, I would say that's standard operating procedure. When we put a set of plans together, we detail the improvements the contractor is going to make, and we detail the things they are not supposed to touch. And those are agreements we make with the property owner when we negotiate with them for easements. So we will have that detailed on the plans as we move through the design of the project.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, Bill 2586 will be on the council's agenda for its next meeting. We have no resolutions. We have a few items under miscellaneous, the first of which is approval of expenditures. And because of the cancellation of the council's next meeting, the way this is handled every year is the council delegates to me as the mayor the ability to approve those expenditures. However, for those of you who have not been through this before, I just want to let you know my approach to that is that the expenditures are emailed to the council ahead of me approving them. And if anyone has any questions or concerns about any of those, please communicate them to me. We'll put a deadline in there. If no one communicates any concerns, then I will approve the expenditure. If anyone communicates a concern, as long as that item is not an essential item that relates to things that keep our city functioning, we would pull that out and wait for the council to debate it. So I think what we're asking for at this point is a motion to give me the ability to approve those expenditures with the understanding of that process that I just laid out. Made by Councilmember McCutcheon, seconded by Councilmember Brost. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? And so Steve, in advance of that deadline for me to approve those expenditures, if you could please get that to the council, ask them by a certain date if they have any issue with anything, and then let me know that so I'll know how to handle it. I would appreciate it. All right, thank you. We have 4 receipt and files. The first relates to the Montessori school. Joe, anything you want to mention relative to that to supplement the information the council has?
Yes, sir. Please, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, Chesterfield Montessori School owns a 7.2 acre parcel of ground on State Route BA, just south of State Route 109. They went through the conditional use permit process with the Planning and Zoning Commission and received favorable action from the City Council in terms of power of review. Then they proceeded forward with architectural review and site development plan approvals. Along came COVID-19, which has impacted the revenue stream at the school, and they are affected in a negative way. The school requested the Planning and Zoning Commission consider amendments to the permit to allow the improvements that are required to be phased in, but not eliminate their use of the site during that period of time. The Planning and Zoning Commission did concur and amended the permit to allow them flexibility in terms of the improvement levels. Conditions associated with that authorization related to the screening of the portable restroom facilities and some of the materials they store on site, which has been accomplished, and that only 2 vehicles may access the site at any given time, and until all improvements are in place, no special events can be held. The petitioner, Chesterfield Montessori School, accepted those requirements, and tonight the report and action is for receipt and filing. If you choose, you can exercise power of review and forward this on to committee for consideration. If not, in 15 days, the amendments will be effective. I'm available for any questions, and thank you.
Any questions for Joe? All right, seeing none, moving to the next 3, and if there's no objection, given that these all 3 are really procedural and self-explanatory and relate to the Planning and Zoning Commission, I would suggest to expedite the meeting of the council that we deal with these en masse in terms of Joe's additions or explanations to any of these 3. If he wants to add anything, is there any objection to dealing with all 3 of these en masse? All right, seeing none, Joe, as to any of these 3, is there anything you would like to mention relative to those? I'm sorry,
Yes,
Councilmember McCutcheon. Hold on just a minute, Joe, sorry. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that it should be Pine Grover Parkway medians and not Pine Grover Loop.
Okay, thank you. Joe, with that, all 3 of these by consensus will be done en masse as a receipt and file. Anything you want to mention relative to any of the 3 of these?
No, sir, but I am available for any other questions that the City Council may have at this time, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have the Planning and Zoning's action on the 5-year capital improvements, the Planning and Zoning Commission's work program schedule, and its meeting schedule. If there are any questions on any of those 3 for Joe, we can entertain those now. Otherwise, we will move to anything else under miscellaneous other than everyone having a great holiday. So does anyone have any questions or comments on any of those 3? Councilmember Remy, on any of those 3? Nope. Okay. All right. So anything else under miscellaneous? Councilmember Remy?
Yes, just wondering if you would entertain a motion traditionally for us to cancel our second meeting of the month for the holidays.
Well, we actually did that in work session, and I think you were momentarily offline at that point.
I couldn't. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear things.
Thank you so much for the kind offer there. We appreciate that, but we got that accomplished. Anything else under miscellaneous? All right. Seeing none, thanks to each of you so much for this evening. Great job once again, and happy holidays. Please be safe, and I look forward to seeing all of you in January.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
See
Everybody.
everybody.